All right, welcome everybody to a special episode 10 of Sharks Talk 916. Not sure we thought we'd be back with you so quickly from the end of the season, but there's been some news that probably everyone's heard about already with Erik Karlsson getting re-signed, and we want to talk a little bit about what that means for the team and kind of what's left to do at this point. So Sharks Talk 916, as always, is brought to you by Sports Talk 916. You can check them out on sportstalk916.com or on the Sports Talk 916 network on Facebook. And I think it's at Sports Talk 916 on Twitter, but you just follow us on Twitter at Sharks Talk 916 because it's better anyways. So let's go ahead and just jump in. I mean, the big news of the day, obviously, is that EK65 is coming back, which was something that, at least to me, was up in the air. They're making it sound like was less up in the air than I thought it was, but
right.
But a huge contract. So highest paid defenseman now in the NHL with this. He'll get, I think it's 11.5 is the cap hit, or is it 12?
Yep, 11.5 per year for 8 years. So
8 years. So
92 million.
I'll go with my first reaction, which I thought, one, it was too many years and it was too much money. I could have seen you maybe extend longer if you can get him cheaper or make a shorter contract for that type of money. But I'm kind of surprised by it. I mean, Doug Wilson is someone that we never is Nolan wearing pads?
No pads, Greg. I just got buff in the off season.
Yeah. So for those who can't see us, if you're not watching live, I'm not wearing a Sharks jersey today because I don't know. I just didn't think to throw one on, but Nolan is wearing his, and he looks like he might have a little shoulder pads going, but apparently he's just been lifting a lot lately. But so what I was saying is I think that Karlsson, with his injury, especially last year, it's a huge risk to sign him for the number of years that you signed him, especially at the cost that we got him for. I was pretty taken aback by it. And that was my first thought. And then my second thought was, okay, where do we go from here? Because we still have a lot of guys we need to sign.
Yeah, and that I'm sure will take up most of our podcast today is what the hell happens now. But as far as initial reactions, I mean, the 8 years, I don't think there's any way that they were going to get around that in order to keep him. I mean, every single star player in the NHL at this point, if they're re-signing with their own team, is going to get 8 years. That's just pretty much the nature of it. I mean, Couture got 8 years. Burns got 8 years. I think Vlasic settled on 7 years, right? He didn't take the full 8, but
yeah, I think he was on 7.
I mean, it's kind of the norm. So that part, I don't think there was any real way to get around if they wanted to keep him anyway. The money, I do agree with you, I think is a bit steep. And I'm really curious to know how much money he would have gotten on the open market from another team. There may be one or two teams that were willing to throw that kind of money at him, because they're desperate and will take any superstar they can get. And I think Doug Wilson knows this is probably more than what he's worth. But I think you have to look at it from, okay, if you look at the Erik Karlsson from last year, he's not worth anywhere close to this contract, but they're not paying him for the Erik Karlsson got last year, right? They're paying him for the guy he was before last year, and that's where the risk comes in. They say they're confident he's going to be healthy. We'll see if that is the case. I was trying to read up this afternoon on groin surgeries to see what kind of success athletes have had and couldn't really find much on it. So that remains to be seen. But as far as initial reactions, I too was surprised that he's back. Granted, the last week or two, there's been rumors that was a possibility, but going into the offseason, both you and I were sort of assuming this was going to be a mutual parting, that Karlsson probably wanted to go elsewhere, and the Sharks probably felt like he wasn't the best fit, but turns out we were 100% wrong on that. So
yeah, and I think there was some, and I don't know that they were necessarily all wrong. I mean, rumors are rumors, so you never know really unless someone comes out in the end and says, yeah, that was true. But there were rumors that his wife wasn't happy, that she wanted to be back closer to home. And I'm married, and I know that would be definitely not be something I could ignore.
Right.
So I don't know how that conversation went or if it was even a thing.
Well,
But
he commented on that today because they asked him about it in the conference call, and he said Melinda, his wife, basically told him, hey, this is your career. Make this a hockey decision, not a decision about where I prefer to live. And it sounds like she's enjoyed her time in San Jose, but he made it seem like she pretty much gave him a clear directive that hey, this is a hockey decision. This is your career. You do what you got to do. What's best for your career. So,
and they wouldn't be the only ones that play in San Jose and really live in Canada either, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to make the trip. Once the season ends, they spend the rest of the off season in Canada. Yeah. The big thing for me, I'm with you, is the injury is a big question. So,
yep.
I did a little reading up on it. I'm like you. I didn't see anything that was definitive. I'm not sure it's a surgery that's performed a lot. Like it's not an injury that you see a ton of. But I did read a couple commentators who've been around hockey for a while that basically said like when a guy like him gets that type of injury, it's rare that they're ever back to their full form again. Now, if he's 98% or 95%, maybe it's worth having him still. But if you're talking like 80%, 75%, I don't think he's worth the money that we paid for him. And how many years is he good for? So,
yeah.
How long till he re-injures it? Or, he's not old, but he's not young. He's kind of that middle. He's in the middle of a career, and he'll probably finish here now with an 8-year contract. So how many good years do you get out of him, and how many years are you paying him $11.5 million to not really play?
Yeah, and the deal does have a full no move clause. So I mean, sure, he could approve a trade down the line, but we all know how that tends to work out historically with no trade clauses. But the one thing I look at this contract, I mean, this is basically an all-in type move, right? I mean, this is the way I look at this contract. If they win a cup while he's here, then it's worth every single penny they paid, even if he sucks for the last 4 years of the contracts. If they win a cup, then
sure,
it is what it is. If they don't win a cup, then this contract is probably going to be one they regret because it's going to severely handcuff them moving forward in terms of what else they can do.
And we'll talk to that in just a second. One last thing I wanted to say though on the big contract is, and I talked to you about this earlier today, is how many guys in the top 10 contracts, right? Like the top 10 biggest paid guys, how many of them are on competitive teams? It's one, basically.
Yeah, the trend is not good there that, teams with cap hits above 10 million on individual players typically struggle to surround them with talent. I will say, though, I mean, San Jose's already got that talent around him, right? It's not like they're in a place now where they have to go out and find other guys to surround them. Those guys are already here. It's just, can they keep them?
Yeah. So that's what we're going to go into next. And that was my thought process, right? Was, okay, you look at the guys around the league who make 11, 12, 16 million, whatever it is that I'm drawing a blank. The Oilers player makes. I don't know.
Connor McDavid. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I mean, you can go around the league. Jonathan Taves, Patrick Kane in Chicago, Crosby in Pittsburgh is the one example of a case where they've been able to succeed. But this is going to become a bigger issue because the 10 million plus cap hits really haven't been even on the table up until now. A couple of the guys who are, top 5 players in the league, sure, have gotten that money, but you're going to see more and more of this. I mean, even Jeff Skinner re-signed for $9 million a year this offseason with Buffalo, and he's not a star player by any means.
Yeah, $9 million is a ridiculous amount for him.
Right.
And I mean, that was what everybody's reaction was when, they paid him that much. Honestly, $9 million for Kane was a questionable amount to me. So my worry is just that you might say, yeah, great, we have a chance to win a cup now because we have Karlsson, but for how long? If you can't re-sign new guys, you need to keep on because you can't bring in the money, or you can't bring in new people who you need to make your team whole because you can't pay them enough. My worry is that those big cap hits prevent you from being as a team competitive. It's not a one-man sport, right? You're not.
Right.
That's the one thing kind of McDavid shows is you're not. Wayne Gretzky's not skating around the ice winning cups for you. It's a team that wins a cup at this point. And I worry that they're hurting the ability to build a team by paying one guy so much money.
Yeah, I mean, they were sort of already in that bind. I mean, because they've got basically, I think, 7 guys now locked up long term: Burns, Vlasic, Jones, Kane, Couture, and now Karlsson. That's 6. So they were already in that hole. Now they've just dug the hole deeper, essentially. But I guess if you're going to dig the hole deeper, who better to do it with than Karlsson, I suppose, is the argument they would make, which obviously he didn't have the year he wanted. No one would dispute that. But, let's say they didn't sign him and then let him go. There's no one on the market that would be able to fill his shoes that's currently available, at least that people believe would consider San Jose. Typically, the Sharks do not have much success with bringing in free agents. Typically, their process has been trade for the guy, let him learn San Jose, see what happens, which is exactly what happened here. Mm-hmm. And once they've played here, then they're much more open to it. But guys who haven't played here before typically don't come here by choice.
So let's talk a little bit about what the team looks like next, what you think the team will look like next year. So we've got, at this point, $12.5 million left.
Right.
And we only have 16 players signed.
Yeah.
So you need 6 to 7 more spots filled. Now you could just bring up guys who aren't making much money in the AHL and fill your team. But I think bringing in 6 new guys, 6 or 7 young guys with no NHL experience is probably a bad bet if you want to compete for a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, and I mean, keep in mind those 16 exclude, Meyer, LeBanc, Thornton, Pavelski, who not all those guys are going to return probably at this point, but at least a couple of them, which we'll get into. So I guess we'll go ahead.
Yeah. So who do you think? So in my vision, Pavelski's gone. And the reason I say that is keeping him means you have to get rid of so much else that I'm not sure it's worth it, right? I can't see you keeping Timo and Pavelski. And I think Timo's too young for you to pass on at this point, especially if you can lock him down for like $4.5 or $5 million for a long contract. And you've got him for the next few years. So I think Pavelski goes and they basically try and sign everybody else. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that Timo is now priority number 1. He may not be the next one to sign just because with RFAs, it's not as much urgency as there is with UFAs, because in order for him to leave, you'd have to sign an offer sheet. And even then the Sharks could still match it. But I agree as far as pecking order in terms of most important to lock up, Timo is definitely at the top of the list. And I don't have any doubts at all that he will be back. Just because of what you said. I mean, he's young. He's the future of the team. Doug Wilson's not stupid. He'll take care of Timo. It's just a matter of how much he's going to cost. And then it's Pavelski, right? What happens with Pavelski is the big question. I'm not ruling it out completely, but I would agree with you that it's unlikely he returns at this point. Doug Wilson did caution today, don't jump to any conclusions. There's things they can do to move money around. But with Pavelski, I really think it comes down to, is he willing to take a hometown discount? And if so, how much? Because they're not going to be able to pay him what he can get on the open market. I mean, he can get probably $6 to $7 million a year on the open market. And the most they can probably pay him is 5.5 at this point. They could push it to 6, but then you're really cutting it tight with trying to lock up Meyer and LeBanc.
Well, my thing is he's making 6 now. So, I mean, you're talking about taking a guy who
he's going to have to swallow his pride if he wants to play here. That's what it comes down to.
And I would jump for joy if he signs for $5.5 million and stays with the Sharks.
Yeah.
I think it's a terrible business decision for him. It's a terrible, professional decision for him.
If he stays, it's purely going to be a loyalty decision, not a financial decision.
Yeah. And you got to wonder how much Jumbo's basically, they've said if he wants to play, he's got a spot. And so he clearly hasn't decided yet whether he wants to play, or at least they're holding off on announcing it if he has. But you got to think that Jumbo coming back plays some role in Pavelski, at least in my mind. Like, I think if Jumbo's gone, there's less of an incentive for him to stick around in San Jose. I mean, you never know how close 2 guys are, but considering Jumbo and Pavelski have played together for so long, I feel like that's going to be a big deal. but we learned with Marlowe that, Doug Wilson's not afraid to make a tough decision. If he can't get someone to stay for what he's willing to pay them, then he'll let them go.
Yeah. And I mean, they could potentially, I'm not going to say pay him full value, but give him a fair contract, maybe 3 years, $6 million a year. But let's say they do that. Let's say they settle on paying him the same amount he's making currently. If he comes back at all, they're going to have to move other guys out. And you and I have talked about this on numerous occasions that, to me, the number one trade candidate is Justin Braun, right? I mean, especially now that you've got, $30 million practically locked up in your defense, more than that. Because you got Burns at 8, Vlasic at 7, and now Karlsson at 11.5. I mean, that's 26.5 for 3 guys. Yeah. And then Braun and Dillon are both around 3.5. Braun's at 3.8. Dillon's at like 3.2. So one of those guys is gone, Braun or Dillon. I think it's Braun because, one, he's more expensive than Dillon. He's not physical, which they lack a lot of on the back end. Dillon's a much more physical player. Dillon also was the only Sharks defenseman that seemed to have any chemistry with Karlsson last year. So I think it would be nice to keep him around. Granted, Dillon's a free agent at the end of the year, as is Braun. So they're both in the same boat contract-wise. But you move Braun out, that saves you almost $4 million. Aaron Dell is probably on his way out as well. They can use either Bebo or Corner for the Barracuda to save about $1 million. Melker Karlsson, I'm sure they would love to move if anyone's willing to take on his $2 million. After that, I don't think they try to move one of the big contracts. First of all, there's a lot of hurdles. Almost all those guys have either limited or full no trade clauses, but the only guys they could move big money wise potentially would be Vlasic, Jones, or Kane. You and I have talked about it. I don't think anyone would be willing to take on Jones or Kane, so Vlasic would really be the only option if they wanted to move a big contract out.
And it becomes a question, is Erik Karlsson worth losing Vlasic? And I think that he also had a rough season, last season, but if you watched him in the playoffs, if you don't want Marc-Edouard Vlasic on your team in the playoffs, you're crazy.
Yeah.
His shutdown defense is better than any of the pairings we're going to have without him.
Yeah, and based off Doug's comments today, I don't see Vlasic going anywhere because Doug made a point to talk about, hey, he compared it to baseball. In baseball, you can never have too much pitching, and he said the same thing about defense, and then mentioned those 3 in particular, Vlasic, Burns, and Karlsson. So I don't see that happening. But if you want to speculate about a big contract, he would be the guy. But I don't think they go that route. Like I said, Braun or Dillon probably gone, Dell gone, and then if they can move out Melker Karlsson, then he would probably be next on the list. Everyone else after that is either a big contract like we talked about, or someone who isn't signed, or they're not making enough money to where it's even worse.
Yeah, because like we said, Donskoy is probably going to go, but
right.
That's not going to be enough. That's not going to free up a ton of money.
No, you're not freeing up any money because he's not signed right now, right?
Yeah,
He got $12.5 million. So,
and Burns, someone asked, how loyal is Burns feeling, and I admit it's got to be rough for Burns to have a guy come in and fetch $2.5 million more a year on average than you are.
3.5 more.
Yeah, but he's not going anywhere. I mean, he's got a no trade for, and he's in for 6 years. I don't think he's going anywhere.
Burns is a rare personality, right? I mean, he's a selfless guy. If there's anyone on the team you wouldn't have to worry about in terms of that, I think Burns would be that guy. In fact, I thought it was kind of funny when, they brought in Karlsson, there was concern, hey, is there room for both of them? They kind of play the same role. And I think those 2 guys are the closest on the team of any guy with Karlsson, Burns and Karlsson. I mean, on the ice, they seem to really enjoy each other. So, and I think that speaks a lot to Burns' character and just who he is as a person. He's the right type of guy to, embrace that type of situation. He just wants to win at the end of the day.
So if you had to guess, Pavelski staying, yes or no?
I think he's gone. I'd put it at 75% chance he leaves at this point.
Yeah, I think that's about right. And I think that because I think as much as Wilson, I'm sure, wants to keep Pavelski, I think he has a lot more freedom if he doesn't have him. He can do a lot more with his money without Pavelski there. Including, like, I think if you want Nyquist back, he can bring Nyquist back. I think he can, who at least knows the system, and you can say, okay, let's give him a few years here to play.
Nyquist is an interesting one for me. As you know, I'm not a big fan of him personally. I wouldn't even think about bringing him back, but I think the Sharks do like him. I'm curious how much of his friendship with Karlsson weighs into a possible return. I mean, you have to think he would come in cheaper than Pavelski, right? So
sure,
if you're looking at it that way, okay, we're going to need another top six forward, but we maybe can't afford Pavelski. Nyquist is a little bit younger. Then I could definitely see that happening, but it's not a choice I would make personally.
Yeah, I think what's he at?
I don't know what
4.75.
Yeah, and then he probably comes right in around that number again.
So he's a couple million cheaper than Pavelski. Then Pavelski is at a steal, right? I think Pavelski can honestly fetch 7 or 8 somewhere, but it would depend on the team, obviously. And I think you can get Nyquist for 4.7. So I think the nice thing is he clearly is friends with Karlsson. He knows the system. And I do think there's things I like in his play. I don't think he ever quite got comfortable in the role, but I like things about him that maybe
he showed potential. He just never, really shined or played to his full potential, I guess I would say. But I mean, he had a great year with Detroit. I just wasn't all that impressed with his time in San Jose. And we talked about this at our, end of the season wrap-up show, about the team. We both feel like the team needs to become more physical and have some guys that are tougher to play against. And Nyquist is definitely not that. I mean, he's a finesse player, and sure, there's always room for offensive creativity, but he's definitely not, in that mold of the guy that's hard to play against by any means.
Yeah, if anything, you'd say the only thing would be he'd free up someone else to play that role, but there isn't anybody else to play that role that isn't already playing it. So, I think it'll be interesting to see, but I'm with you. I think it's probably really unlikely that Pavelski manages to stay. Because to me, the way your team looks if he does, you're happy you have your captain back, but then how much do you lose in order to do that? I get that defense is extremely important for winning cups, but you also have to have an offense, and you have to have multiple lines that are productive. You can't just rest it all on 1 or 2 lines. So,
yeah, and if he does leave, I mean, that does leave a pretty significant hole up front. I mean, because in terms of the main guys, I mean, you'd have Couture, Meyer, assuming he returns, which we both think he will, Hurdle, Kane, and then LeBanc if he returns, which I think is fairly safe to assume at this point he probably comes back. Don't know at what cost, but I think he'll be back. I mean, that's not – it's good depth compared to a lot of teams, but it's not, the depth that you used to have. I mean, basically, comparing to last year's roster, you'd be losing Nyquist, Pavelski, and Donskoy. That's 3 guys that are potential top 9 guys that are not in your lineup moving forward.
Yeah, and you already had trouble building a 4th line that you could stick with. So now you don't have a 4th line, and you don't really have a 3rd line that you can put together. I mean, I'm looking at Nolan put together a cap friendly with the idea of keeping Pavelski, and I'm just looking at it, and you're talking so.
Yeah, the numbers I had was Meyer at 4.75, LeBanc at 3.5. I think I had Thornton at 1.75, which I don't know what's going to happen with that situation. And then Pavelski, I think I had at 6, which is the max I could see the Sharks paying him.
And then I'll just name some of the other people you have on your list here. So Barclay Goodrow, Alex True, who everybody knows.
He was a very good player for the Barracuda this year.
Lukasz Radil, Ivan
Chekovic almost made the team. Chekovic, I think you're right. Almost made the team out of camp last year and tore up Quebec junior hockey this year.
And then Devontae Smith-Pelly.
Yeah, he's just a 4th line free agent type. So,
and the thing with that is that's great. It's just I don't know how those guys are really going to play in the NHL. I mean, I know how Goodrow plays in the NHL. He plays to where they barely have him in the NHL. But
yeah, they're going to have to rely on some of these young guys to come up. I mean, fortunately for them, they have 3 guys that were arguably, if not the best player in their junior league, near the top of their league last season, and Chmielewski, Shakovic, who you just mentioned, and Joaquin Blickfield. So I think at least one of those guys probably makes the team out of camp. And historically, the Sharks have always, with high skill young players, have always tried to integrate them onto a higher line and not just the fourth line, so that if they are going to be up there, they're going to be surrounded by the talent to help them succeed and not, sort of waste their time on the fourth line. So that is probably highly likely at this point, considering their cap situation. They're not going to be able to fill out the top 9 with veteran guys at this point.
Well, and then you almost have to have Jumbo come back, right? If you have Pavelski, you have to bring Jumbo back, because who's your third line center?
Yeah, that is the question. If Joe retires, which I still believe he will come back, there seems to be some rumblings lately that he's actually legitimately thinking about retiring, which to me wasn't even on the table. But if he retires, that is a big hole in your third line center. I mean, you'd have to turn to Dylan Gambrell if they can re-sign him, or Suomela started the year as the third line center last year. He's also, I believe, up for, I think he's signed for this year, but they'd be looking at a young player. There are a few guys on the free agent market like Kevin Hayes, but those guys are going to cost quite a bit to fill that spot. So,
yeah. So let's go with what we both think is going to happen. So Pavelski leaves. So who's your captain?
I think Couture is the captain without question. Although I did see an interesting idea today from somebody I was talking to on Twitter who had the concept that, if Thornton does return, let him be captain for one more year, going back to when he was captain before. And then you can give it to Couture after that. I could see that potentially happening, but more I think about it, I don't think so, because I don't think they want to cross that bridge again. Once you take it away, it's kind of strange to give it back to a guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think your other 2 people that you would look at would be Thornton, obviously. I don't think Hertl can be captain. I think Hertl would make a good alternate, honestly, at this point. So maybe if you make Logan the captain, you make Hertl an alternate, get his English skills a little better before you make him captain. But as a leading, I just think as a leading forward, which honestly, not to take away from Couture, played excellent during the playoffs, but Hertl for the season was probably your best forward in the season. So,
right. I mean, the other guy I've thought about historically is Vlasic. I don't know if I would still put him in that conversation just because of his personality. I don't think is really suitable to be a captain. But
I don't think he needs more TV interviews.
Yeah, that honestly is a big part of captaincy. I mean, who gets interviewed first after every game? The captain. Yeah. And we all know how much he loves media interaction. So,
especially Kersey. Oh man, they're best friends.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess you could throw Karlsson in that conversation, but I don't see them throwing that on him, considering the situation. That's just a lot to ask.
Agreed.
So it'll be Logan most likely if Pavelski does not come back.
And so then, final question I've written down. So next season, you think with Karlsson now signed, I know what Kerr's answer would be, but are the Sharks now a cup contender because they have Karlsson?
Well, I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you did. Kerr's argument was basically, in order to keep themselves as a cup contender, they had no choice but to sign Karlsson, because kind of like I was saying earlier, who else are you going to bring in at this point? I mean, the free agent market, the guys that are out there probably do not have San Jose high on their list. So there's really no, immediately available option to fill his shoes. But at the same time, do you just go sign a guy because he's the best option? I mean, that's debatable. But to get back on track, I do think they are a cup contender, but they got a lot of work left to do this offseason to, really cement themselves in that place. And I don't think we've really seen, what impact Karlsson can have on this team yet. I think it's sort of an unknown because, I mean, yeah, sure, he had that 2-month stretch rather, where he was playing at the top of his game and the team looked really good. But I mean, we haven't seen him at his best for an entire season. I mean, hell, he only scored 2 goals last year. So I think it's kind of an unknown, how good this team potentially could be if he is healthy and, performs like he historically has.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going down the kind of existing free agent list and looking at defensemen.
Yeah, defensemen, I mean, it's Tyler Myers and Jake Gardner, which they're good players, but they're not elite players by any means.
But I guess that's the question. Do you need another elite defenseman?
No.
Or can you get by with a good defenseman and an elite offense?
I mean, I would argue that they need an elite offensive player more than they do an elite defenseman. Granted, Karlsson tremendously helps the offense, so you can argue that he impacts both. But, I mean, the best offensive players out there are Duchesne and Panarin. Duchesne's not going to come here and be a third-line center. I mean, he's more of a first- or second-line center, and I don't think they're going to demote, Hurdle or Couture down to a third line at this point. Artemi Panarin, all the rumors are he wants to go to a big city, which population-wise, San Jose is a big city, but it's not known as a big city in terms of, the big city appeal, I suppose. So, and those are really the 2 elite offensive players available in free agency.
Yeah. So I think that I get why that you make and maybe that's part of the decision-making process, right? Is like, if I don't sign Karlsson, who else can I go out and get that's going to...
Well, I think that's Kurz's argument. I think for Doug Wilson, uses the term difference maker, right? I refer to a superstar. He calls it difference maker, but he says himself, there's not many difference makers out there. And basically when you have the opportunity to get one, you go get one, which he did by trading for him. And then once you have him, you keep him. I don't think he really, with these types of talents, really is overly concerned about how it fits on the team or what they specifically need. He just looks at it and says, okay, you don't get the opportunity very often to have a guy like this on your team. You get him, and then you figure out how he fits. And because he's such a great player, he's going to make your team better regardless, I think is how Doug Wilson looks at it.
And how much do you I'm just curious what you think. How much do you think what the coach thinks plays into it? Like, how much is Doug, talking to the coaching staff and figuring out who fits well on the team based on their perspective, and how much is he just making his own decisions because he's Doug Wilson and he knows what he's doing?
For a situation like this, I don't think it has much impact. I'm sure he consults DeBoer on every move just to get his input, but with a superstar like this, I don't think the coach has much say on it. With more complementary pieces, I think the coach has a significant say. With guys like Donskoy, who haven't really fit that well in DeBoer's system, I would think he would have quite a bit of input. Mikhail Bodker is probably a great example of that in the past. I mean, clearly didn't fit, clearly did not work with DeBoer. They clearly did not mesh well together. So I'm sure, and anyone could see that, but I do think the coach probably has significant input on lower level decisions, but with big time players, I mean, well, and plus, what coach is going to say, no, I don't want Erik Karlsson? I mean,
yeah,
you're not going to turn down having, a top 5 defenseman in the NHL. So.
And I guess you're not necessarily looking at signing Karlsson as losing Pavelski. Like, this is the kind of stuff that I always wonder. Like, are they doing those calculations in their head, or are they just saying getting Karlsson is the first step, and then we can worry about everything after that?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, obviously in Doug's head, Karlsson was priority number 1. And they kind of had to know what was going to happen with Karlsson before they could do anything else, right? Because of the salary impact. I mean, and Doug even talked about that today, that the fact that they know this now and not 2 weeks from now when free agency starts is a huge advantage, because now they've got, 2 weeks to figure out where they're at with Pavelski, where they're at with Meyer, where they're at with LeBanc, and, see, number 1, how much money they have left, and number 2, what holes they have to fill before training camp.
I was just noticing what Hayes is a free agent again. Maybe we can finally make that happen.
Some of you saw he got his rights got traded to the Flyers, and rumors today were that the Flyers are pretty close to signing him potentially.
Oh,
so he may be off the market before July 1st hits. But if he hits the market, he's one of those guys I was talking about. Though, if Thornton retires, sure, he'd be a great third line center, but he's going to command $5-6 million at that point. You might as well just bring Pavelski back.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, my dream is that Thornton plays fourth line and we have a good third line center, but I don't think that's going to happen.
If the only way I see that happen is if one of the young guys suddenly emerges as a great third line center, but even then, I don't see them slotting a guy like Gambrell or Suomela or True over Jumbo if he does come back.
Yeah, I just imagine the level of talent Jumbo's playing against if he's on the fourth line, and then you could put new guy. What he does with young players is amazing to me.
Yeah, the Pavelski thing is interesting to me though because like I said, I think the most they can possibly even think about paying him is $6 million a year, and that's probably pushing it because of their cap situation. But let's say they can pay him $6 million, by moving out other guys, and then if he doesn't come back, you're saying, okay, we need to replace his offense with someone who's not as expensive, but how much are you willing to pay for that replacement? $4 million? Are you going to get a guy that's any good for $4 million? And then you're like, okay, is that $2 million difference you saved worth losing him? Is there another way we can get rid of $2 million to fit him in? And that's kind of the interesting conundrum for me is, how do you make that decision between saving $1.5 million to $2 million for Pavelski compared to somebody like Nyquist?
That's the cap space problem, though, right? Like is that if
$1 million can make or break you, unfortunately.
Yeah, so. If Pavelski wants $7 million, but you can only keep him if he goes for $6 million.
Right.
Then you go out and you find a guy. You find the best player you can find for $6 million, and you sign him because it keeps you under cap.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's a rough position to be in. I kind of wish they'd signed Pavs and then gone to EK and said, "This is what we have. This is what we can give you." Kind of go the other route with it and see. Supposedly he wanted to stay.
See how much he really wants to stay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what he said, right? He said he wanted to stay. He said it wasn't really.
They all say that, but yeah.
Sure. But I'm saying okay, so offer him 10 or 9.5, whatever it is that you can offer if you sign Pavs, and then say this is.
Well, and it sounded like there wasn't even much of a negotiation. Doug today said the numbers were going to be the numbers no matter what. That's pretty much what he said. So they may have even agreed on the large framework of what the numbers were going to look like during the season. It was just a matter of, Karlsson deciding whether he ultimately wanted to stay here or not.
When you never know what Doug knows, right? He might know that another team was willing to offer that much. And so it was a matter of.
Well, and I'm sure he knows too, what range Pavelski's going to fall into and Timo and LeBanc. And he may not have the exact numbers, but I'm sure he has a range of where he thinks those guys will end up landing.
I guess the other hope is maybe Timo and Pavs each take a little bit of a hometown discount or whatever you want to call it, like a little bit of a loyalty discount. So maybe Timo takes less than he could get on the open market and Pavs takes less than he'd get on the open market, and they manage to sign both. I don't see it happening. And in both cases, I think for Timo especially, it's a terrible decision for him to take less than he's worth.
Young guys, the young guys typically don't do hometown discount. It may look that way because they're not going to get as much. If he had that same production at 29 years old, he'd be getting paid $8 to $9 million a year. But because you would think younger, he would get even more, right? But no, because he hasn't proven it consistently, and he could revert back to not being as effective. But yeah, it'll be, and they obviously don't have the power of free agency. They can't. Sure, they can sign an offer sheet with another team, but it's a little bit different than, July 1st comes and anybody can sign him without the Sharks having the option to match. So,
yeah.
But
all right, any last thoughts?
Well, someone threw out an interesting idea on, I don't know if it was Twitter or I think Kurz mentioned it on his interview with NHL Network today. that he could see a situation with Joe Thornton where Joe only plays half the season. Mike Fisher for the Predators did that this past year. Just as he gets older, not having to play a full season, come back in, say, December or January so that he's, really juiced up come playoff time, and it saves you extra cap space because you're only paying him for half a season, assuming you don't pay him a prorated version of what you planned on paying him originally. So I don't know if Joe's the type of guy that would be willing to do that, but I thought it was an interesting concept that I haven't even thought of to this point that makes sense potentially.
How do you do that? Does he play the second half of the season? Does he play the first half?
Doesn't sign a contract until, like November or December, and then he joins the team once he signs, basically.
That is an interesting thought. I mean, it doesn't free up a ton of money, but it's because he's going to.
Every take a couple $100,000 they're going to need at this point. So,
yeah, I mean, I can't see him. The guy, if he plays, I think it would eat at him to not play while the season's going.
Yeah, that's what Steve just said in the chat, and I think that's probably true. It's just I thought it was interesting because I hadn't even thought of that concept. But
can he sign for the? Well, I guess it's still a Sharks contract, even if they play for Barracuda, if they can come back up, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no.
He just goes and plays Barracuda for the first half of the season, and then it comes up at the end to play the Sharks second half.
The comment from Doug today too. They asked him about Thornton, and he goes, Joe Thornton will always have a place in this organization on or off the ice, which that was a very poignant statement, on or off the ice. That tells me he's actually legitimately considering retiring. That's not a foregone conclusion that he's playing next year.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's got all the skill he needs to play next year. There's no doubt that he has the health to play, the skill to play. I don't think there's any doubt he can be an effective player, but who knows why? It seems like he's legitimately thinking about calling it.
Well, you don't just seeing him play doesn't mean you know how he feels, right? Like, I mean,
you don't know what it takes for him to get on the ice.
Yeah, you don't know what time he has to get up in the morning to be mobile by hockey time. And as someone who's close to Thornton's age, I can tell you that, like, the older you get, the regardless
of your ACL too, didn't you?
Meniscus, but which isn't as bad, and I can tell you it still hurts. I mean, it still hurts. It still pops. It's still annoying. So you never know, like you said, just what it takes to get going for him. I'd love to see him coach if he doesn't play. I think he'd be a great assistant coach on the team. Just having him there is a big deal, I think, for the team. But I also think he'd be a good development guy for the younger players.
I was thinking about that today too as a coach, and then a part of me tells me he would have to wait like 5 or 6 years, because if he's on the bench,
he just jumps on the ice.
He's going to want to play. Like, I don't think he could separate himself and make himself a coach until he's had a few years to kind of let go of his playing passion, right?
I don't know. You get a ring as a coach, right?
Well, yeah, but he's the type of guy, he'd want to be out there helping the boys. And I could see him being a coach at some point, but not right now. He needs some time to let go of that first, I think.
Yeah, I could see that.
Otherwise, he'd want to suit up every night, and not in the suit and tie.
I don't know that ever will end for him. Like, I don't know that.
I don't either, and that's what would surprise me most if he does retire. Like, we've talked about him numerous times. There's no one who loves hockey more than that guy. And so why would he not continue to play until he just physically can't? Yeah. Until there's not a spot left for him.
Or until his wife tells him he's not allowed to play anymore.
Well, that's the one thing it could be, right? Maybe it is family. Maybe he, is tired of being away from them. I don't think she lives in Sweden any longer. I know that's where she's from originally. I think they live in the Bay Area, at least during the season, and then in Canada in the off season. But that could be it. I mean, maybe he wants to, spend more time raising his kids, and, he's tired of being away from them. That I think probably would be the reason if he does hang it up.
Yeah.
Which you can't blame anyone for. So
either way, I think we're in for some sad times coming up. I think that we're going to lose people that we're not, at least I'm not ready as a fan to lose. Marlowe was a little rough, but I think actually Pavs will be harder for me, and Jumbo will be way harder for me.
Yeah, at least Jumbo, you'll never have to see him play in another jersey, at least not in the NHL. He could go play in Sweden or something, but I mean, he said himself 100 times by now, it's the Sharks are retirement for me. So,
speaking of Marlowe, by the way, are you ready to see him in a Ducks jersey?
I have zero problems with Patrick Marleau playing for the Ducks or Kings. I am all for making our division opponents worse, which no offense, Patty, but and it's not that he's a bad player at this point, it's just the cap hit, right? I mean, and the Kings especially, that rumor was comical because I mean their entire issue is being too old as it is, and they're going to turn around and add another guy. Although I heard that a lot of teams that kicked around trading for him planned to immediately buy him out. And basically the trade would be, okay, we'll take his contract. You give us a good young player or a high draft pick, and we'll eat the contract and then cut him loose and he can go sign with whoever wants him.
You're basically doing them a favor to get
with our cap situation, if he does get bought out by somebody, I could see him signing a sweetheart deal for $1 million and joining the Sharks again, potentially.
Just to retire a Shark?
Yeah, and I mean, they are going to need some help offensively if the guys go that we think are going to go. So
that'd be interesting. I mean, I can't imagine some part of him doesn't want to come back and end his career here.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's no chance in hell we can take on his current cap hit, but if he gets traded somewhere and bought out, then it definitely could happen.
Be interesting to see. All right, anything else you want to talk about during our very special edition of Sharks Talk?
I would just like to make a public service announcement, probably to the more casual Sharks fans who may fall into this trap. If Pavelski does leave, please don't blame Karlsson for this. You know, Doug Wilson's the one making the decisions, right? It's not Karlsson's fault that Pavelski stays or doesn't stay. You know, it's not his responsibility to take less money to keep the team together. And I am worried about the fan reaction to Karlsson if he doesn't, you know, perform at the Norris Trophy level that, you know, he's expected to, especially making the money he is. And because very well his contract is going to cause some fan favorites to leave. So
yeah,
especially
if he comes in, Pavs leaves, and then he gets injured next season.
Right, it's going to be really bad.
Like you said, it's neither one of their faults, right? Like they both have to do what's best for their career.
Exactly.
And I wouldn't blame Karlsson. I think he legitimately does want to play here, obviously, because he could have waited to hear other offers.
Yep.
And he didn't do that. So he clearly wants to be here. And I think Pavs wants to be here, but I also wouldn't blame him if he decides he wants to make more money somewhere else. So, yeah, Doug Wilson will get the blame, or should get the blame, if this all goes badly. And if it goes great, Doug Wilson will get the credit, as he always does.
You and I talked about it too. I mean, you're talking about a 29-year-old defenseman, Norris Trophy winner, should be in his prime at that age. It's debatable whether he still is, but you'd rather have Pavelski, who's 35 and near the end of his career. I mean, logically, you've got to separate the fandom from reality that Karlsson's a more valuable player at this point. I could see an argument maybe not for the Sharks, but I mean, any NHL team would take Karlsson over Pavelski in a heartbeat.
Oh, sure. And you wouldn't pay.
We get both, but
you wouldn't pay Pavelski $11 million. I mean, it wouldn't. That's not even in the cards. But I think I feel like this always happens to us. Like when a guy's getting close to being a free agent, and he's a little older, he has a great season, and then you're stuck with this. Well, now do we let a guy go who just scored 30 goals last season and is the captain leading our team? And, you know, if he'd had a shitty season, we'd be like, it's time for Pavelski to move on.
His season put them in a no-win situation because now he's really due elite pay when they can't afford to pay him that.
Yeah.
And they got bit in the ass by the season he had for sure. Like I said, if he had even the season he had the year before, he's probably already re-signed, or they can much easier make the decision, say, you know, hey, he's nearing the end of a career, his performance has slipped, you know, we need to bring up young guys, and you could go either way. So
I mean, I guess right before contract negotiations is the time to have your best season, but
it's
annoying.
Say about the old contract year, right? Tends to bring out the best in everyone. So,
all right. Anything else?
Nope. It's going to be a very busy next couple of weeks, I anticipate. Doug mentioned today that if they can add a few draft picks between now and Friday when the draft is, that they will do that. So stay tuned to Twitter over the next couple of days. You very well could see guys like Braun dealt the next couple of days for draft picks.
Yeah.
Because any of those trades, they can't take salary back. So it's not going to be a roster for roster trade. It's going to be those guys for draft picks because they can't take any cap space back at this point. So
I think we've got enough. We got enough defensemen we can put in for Braun.
Yeah.
That I'm not worried about that. Like I think I know you're not a huge Heat fan. You like Ryan better, but I think Heat or Ryan can slot in to that position, and we're not losing a lot on the ice for it.
I gotta re-sign one of those guys at least because they're up for free agency too. But they shouldn't be hard to bring back. But expect a busy next couple of days and weeks, and just like Chad said, be prepared for some fan favorites to not be Sharks here in the very near future.
Yeah, and I think once the dust settles, we'll probably do another show and just talk about what the makeup of the team is now, and maybe pieces that need to be picked up in the long run before.
Yeah, we should have a pretty good idea by July 2nd what this team is going to look like, because the Sharks probably aren't going to be big players in free agency just because they don't have the money to. It may take. I could see the Bankenmeyer pushing past July 1st because they're RFAs, but Pavelski and Donskoy and Nyquist, those guys, we should know right around then what the deal is with them. So,
all right. Well, so keep an eye out. We'll have a show when we have a better idea of what the full makeup is. I don't want to do one every time. Yeah, I don't want to do one every time there's a signature, but I think definitely if there's a Pavelski move, that'll be worth talking about, and we'll just wrap up whatever else is in there at the same time.
Yep.
So thanks for joining us. Again, Sharks Talk 916. You guys can follow us on Twitter at Sharks Talk 916. We don't tweet a whole lot right now, but we probably will around trades and stuff like that. Check us out. Check out Sports Talk 916, our sponsor online at sportstalk916.com or the Sports Talk 916 network on Facebook. We also do a little bit of posting on that page as well. And other than that, subscribe and give us a review if you like what you hear. If you don't like what you hear, don't give us a review because I don't want to have bad reviews, I guess. Now, tell us what you think either way. We love constructive criticism.
Unless you're a Vegas fan. No feedback.
Yeah, if you're welcome. Yeah, if you're a Vegas fan, don't leave feedback. Oh, so one last thing. When I went to Oklahoma, on my way out, my layover was Colorado, and on my way back, my layover was Vegas. Ugh. And both times I was really sad I didn't have any Sharks gear to wear with me because there were salty fans wandering around everywhere.
Yeah. Well, at least you didn't go through St. Louis.
Oh God, no. Yeah, that would have made the trip complete.
We didn't even talk about that. The Cup final. I cannot believe Boston lost, but yeah, it happens. So,
I guess the good part is they started calling the Blues on their bad.
They did, hit. But too little, too late, right? I mean, they probably wouldn't have got to that point if they had called that the rest of the playoffs. But
yeah, well, spilt milk and all that. Can't cry too much about it. We can boo them next season, I guess, when they come to visit. It's put a strain on my relationship with Steve, who was our guest, because I started out wanting to root for the Blues, and then they just kept up shenanigans, and I just
kept the same shit going. Yep.
I couldn't. I got to where I just didn't watch any hockey and just hope both teams would somehow lose.
Like the first time in your life you root for a Boston team, right?
No, I couldn't do it. I just didn't root for anybody.
I did, but it wasn't easy. So.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining. Those of you who joined live, and if you're listening on the podcast, thanks for listening. And see you guys in a few weeks.
See you guys.